Alright, so this is the second part to lesson 5.1. We're continuing to learn how to write equations in slope-intercept form. So if you remember, slope-intercept form is just one way of writing a linear equation. The form is y equals mx plus b, where m is our slope and b is our y-intercept. So m is how much it's changing from one point to the next, how steep it is, how flat it is, and b is that y-intercept where the line is touching or crossing the y-axis. And so what we've been doing is trying to figure, okay, what is our slope and what is our y-intercept? And so then to write the equation using that form. In this part of the lesson, we're going to look at how do we do that when given just 2 points. So before we were given either the slope and the y-intercept and just had to plug them in, or we were given a graph and we had to figure out the slope and the y-intercept from that. But now we're going to look at, if I'm just given 2 points like what you see up here, 0, -3, and 3, 2, can I still figure out what the slope is and what the y-intercept is to then write the equation in slope-intercept form? So just any 2 points on a line, can I then figure out what the equation of that line is? And yes, I can. And I can do that by doing a few simple steps. And the first one is to use the slope formula to figure out what the slope is. So if you remember, we talked about this using a slope formula, where you find the difference in the y's over the difference in the x's to help us figure out what is the slope. And so you can see that's what's going on here. And I find the slope to be 5/3. And then to figure out the y-intercept, that's one of our points up here, right? We can see that one of our points is 0, -3. And any point that has a 0 for the x is going to be our y-intercept, and that y value of that point is our y-intercept. So in this lesson, I'll just be giving you points where one of them is the y-intercept. We won't be looking at anything else. And so you'll just need to identify, okay, this is the point that is the y-intercept because the 0 is in the x position, so that means our x is 0. And so our y-intercept is -3. And I can see that from that point there. And then I plug those into our form y equals mx plus b, and I write my equation. So the steps that I just went through to do that, and we'll look at another problem more drawn out, I just kind of wanted to give you a view of what that looked like. But the steps I went through to solve that are right here, and these are the steps that we can follow to figure out any of these problems that you encounter. And these steps are also in your notes. So I first label my coordinate points, x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. So I just identifying this is the first point, this is the second point. And then I use those points with my slope formula right here, okay, if you remember that slope formula, to help find the slope. I plug those values into the slope formula, and then I'll simplify by subtracting the y's and subtracting the x's. And then I find the b from the coordinate point. And as I said, in this lesson, I'm just going to give you the y-intercept point. It'll be 0 and then some number, and that is the y-intercept point. And so whatever that y value is, that's your b. And then you'll plug in the m, the slope, and the b, the y-intercept, into the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. And so those are the steps that you'll take in order to write these equations, and these steps are also in your notes, as I said, and so we'll be able to look at them as we go. So let's go ahead and look at an example. So let's look at page 2 in your notes to look at an example of how do we write an equation when starting with 2 points. So I'll zoom in here. You can see we're going to do our work off to the left, and then the process or those steps that I talked about just a second ago are over here off to the right. So the first step is to label the points. So we have our 2 points here, 0, -3, and 2, 4. And I'm going to label them as x sub 1, y sub 1, and x sub 2, y sub 2, just to say this is the first point, this is the second point. And now that might make it a little bit easier to plug into our slope formula, which is our next step, the slope formula. So we have our x's and our y's. Our y's will go on top and our x's will go on bottom. And so let's go ahead and plug that into the formula. So that's what the points would look like in the formula. Remember, we take the y's subtracted from each other on top, and then the x's subtracted from each other on bottom. And then I'm just going to simplify that. And so I have right here m is equal to 7/2 or 7 over 2. That is my slope. Okay, that's what I did in those first 4 steps, was to figure out what is my slope, and I used the slope formula to do that. So using the 2 points and the slope formula, I can figure out what the slope is of this line. Okay, and so I need this information for my equation. So that took us up to step 4. Okay, and now we're going on to step 5. Step 5 says to find b from the coordinate point, okay, and it says with the x value of 0. So if you remember, we have 2 points here, and one of them has an x value of 0. Okay, that x value of 0. Whichever one has the x value of 0, that's your y-intercept. Okay, that's where the line, that's the point where the line is crossing the y-axis. So if our point is 0, -3, then our y-intercept, or our b, is going to be -3. Okay, that's where the line is crossing the y-axis. So now we have our m and our b. M is 7/2, b is -3, and so we can plug those into y equals mx plus b. So y is equal to 7/2 x plus -3. Plus -3. And remember, when we add a negative, that's the same thing as subtracting. So we simplified that a little bit to be 7/2 x minus 3. And this will be our final answer. 7/2 x minus 3. So if I go back over that just real briefly, I had my 2 points up here. I plugged them into the slope formula. Okay, that's my second step, and my third step. And then I simplify it down to figure out what the slope is. And then I find the b from the coordinate point, okay, the coordinate point with the x value of 0. So b is equal to -3. And then I plug in my slope and my b into the form y equals mx plus b. And I just simplified here at the end because plus a -3 is the same thing as -3. And so that would be your final answer. And so all of these can be done using this process here. So that's why you want to keep your notes in front of you, so you can look back on that.